I started Twitter back in like 2009 when I was covering the Crimson Tide. And then I went from covering Alabama to covering kind of all of the Southeast and doing a regional show. And then I went to Atlanta, and then I went to the ACC, and then I kind of, all over. And so I should have, if I wasn't engaging, I should have lost audience because I wasn't covering what they came to me for. But I ended up growing and retaining people because I've always said there are some folks out there that will say something like they forgot it's called social media for a reason. They'll say something, and Carlos, it's like an echo chamber. Like they don't talk back to people. They don't engage. And I'm like, man, it's called social for a reason. And I have been prayed for. I've been lifted up. I have met some of the most, I've been chased down in an airport. I have friends from social media that I've made. Like, it's been such a blessing. And so I think that's just the greatest advice to actually engage and as simple as it sounds, to be social on social media.
Yeah. And you bring up such a good point. Yeah, I believe that the majority of consumers are using these platforms, not just Twitter, but all of them. They're really using social media as an outlet. It's an escape, right? And I think even so in these times, right? It's an escape from reality. I often call social media being a parallel universe to the real world because it's not real life. And I've had these debates with people where they say that online connections and friendships and relationships are the same as in person. I disagree with that. Like, for being a guy in my mid-30s, I'm real old school, and the reality is that an online relationship isn't the same as an in-person relationship. But what it is, it's a good gateway, right? And there's many times where I've met people online, and then that leads to an in-person relationship, or it leads to an introduction to someone that they know in person. And then that in itself forms a life of its own because there's a new relationship that's formed there. I would say, going back to what you said before, just because you work in an industry for so many years doesn't mean that you always need to be known as that. Doesn't mean that you spent 17 years in journalism and you just are always going to be known as that. I've had periods in my career where, I started off working in banking before there was even social media, right? I rebranded myself. I started working in corporate marketing, rebranded myself, as just more of an entrepreneur. Like you asked me before we came on here, like, do you want me to introduce you as this? And I was like, no, just say author and speaker, right? Because you get to a point where it's like, you're going to follow me for me because there's some substance there that you're going to follow, but you're not going to follow me just because you're putting me in a box. And, that's tricky for some people. Like, I just started up an e-commerce business 3 months ago because of COVID. And now people are coming out of the woodwork like, hey, like, since when are you into fashion? Are you into retail? It's like, well, I've always liked fashion. I've always had aspirations to have my own e-commerce brand, but I just didn't do it because the time wasn't right.
I love that. And I'm curious about that because you talk about your past, and I found it fascinating. Listen to me, that you know this, but from my audience and your audience and everybody that watches this, some of the greatest ideas, some of the greatest ingenuity, some of the greatest fighters and hustlers are born out of tough times. And you, my friend, I have it here. I think it was called Pink Slip Parties. And
wow.
You
really went way back.
But tell me how that was born out of really tough times in the economy and how that brought Virgin Mobile to your universe.
So first of all, to anyone out there that's aspiring to do a podcast or have a live show, take some lessons from Rachel over here, because I can tell that as a journalist, you've done some research, so that's definitely good. Pink Slip Parties came to fruition back in 2009. In the fall of 2008, I was laid off from my job in banking, and I started up an online job board. And I was 25 years old back then. I had no personal brand. Social media was still relatively untapped from a professional standpoint. And the same day I lost my job, which is November 5th, 2008, was the same day that I joined LinkedIn. And within a few days, I became inspired to help people find jobs. I started up a company. And when you're in your mid-20s and you have no money for marketing, you have to get really, really scrappy. And one thing I had to, as a competitive advantage back then was, being that I was younger, I could take some risks that nowadays, having kids and being a little bit older in my career, I can't take the same type of risks.
Okay.
But I decided to host these events called pink slip parties, starting in Jacksonville, Florida, where I lived at the time, to unite people who were unemployed together with people who were employed. And these events would take place typically on like a Tuesday or Wednesday night at a local bar. The bar would throw in a couple drinks. There was no money out of pocket for me, other than I would just have to promote the event, make sure that people showed up. So one of the strategies that I implemented was I used Twitter to pitch to reporters and to the media. Literally every single day, I would be pitching to the local TV stations, to the local reporters. I would be sending in a media alert. So I taught myself public relations and communications by writing press releases and media alerts. I would reach out to just about every recruiter I could in the city that I was going into. And I started hosting these events, and every single pink slip party I did for the first year, media would come out. So within the first year, it was like CNN when I was in Atlanta, you know, all the Fox affiliates, NBC affiliates for like Miami, Orlando, you know, you name it. Like every city I would go into, I would get media coverage. And when I would get media coverage, now there would be like a whole like new audience that would come register on my website, and they would learn about me and the mission that I was doing.
Okay.
That in itself was something that I did for about 2 years, and I made no money. In the meantime, Virgin Mobile / Sprint, parent company to Virgin at the time, they were seeing everything I was doing from afar. And one day they hit me up and they're like, hey, we've been seeing what you've been doing for 2 years. You've been consistent about it. You haven't given up on your mission. You're getting a ton of press and media coverage. We want to get behind this. And that in itself was parlayed into a multiple US city tour. We call it the Pink Slip Tour. And that was definitely a peak of my career. A little different from what I'm doing today, or I'd say very different from what I'm doing today. But, you know, even though I struggled during those times, I learned marketing. You know, I learned what it's like to turn lemons into lemonade. A lot of the lessons that I learned back then, being in my 20s, has helped me now in my 30s, especially in this era of COVID. And, you know, I was able to get through a very tough period of my life and work with some amazing brands and actually turn a career out of it.
Pretty amazing. And that's where a lot of people find themselves right now, Carlos. They're business owners. Listen, I talked about it earlier. I had to pivot very quickly. I had to figure out other revenue streams. I had to figure out other ways to get my message out there, all of those things, right? So the book that you wrote, at the End of Marketing, Humanizing Your Brand in the Age of Social Media and AI, the basic way you're the marketing whiz, right? The basic way I can describe it is brands want to tell feel-good stories, and they want to attach themselves to good things. What would you tell a business owner right now that says, man, I don't know if I need to do newspaper advertising or radio advertising right now? Like, what should I be looking for? What's something cutting edge that I can be doing? Maybe not cutting edge, but something from your mind, expertise.
I would say at a very minimum, Facebook and Instagram ads. Like at 30,000 feet level, I would say to any business owner, even if you spend $10 a day, that's a $300 a month investment. I guarantee that you can scrounge, you know, $300 to $500 from somewhere, especially if you're doing any form of advertising. You know, invest money into reaching a targeted audience for a low price point in the city where you do business. I think a lot of businesses often think that Facebook ads are going to be really expensive, and they can be if you're trying to reach millions of people. But, you know, if you're in, you know, Jacksonville, Florida, and you're, again, a mom and pop laundry store, you're targeting a very small, you know, subset of people. The other, and really what I meant throughout the End of Marketing, and you kind of touched on it, you know, that brands need to tell stories, which is, you know, part of it. People today are brands themselves.
Yes.
I'm a brand, you're a brand, we have reach, we have influence. So your traditional brands, quote unquote, really what they are is their logos, and they're viewed as just products and services. And people don't go onto social media with the intent of being engaged by a product or service. In fact, they go onto Google or the internet to go to a brand's website, but they're not going onto social media to sniff out and see what, you know, Coca-Cola is saying today or what Nike is selling. they're going to talk to their friends. So in order for brands to, again, I use this term before, growth hack or reverse engineer marketing,
Mm-hmm.
they themselves need to use human faces and voices to storytell and to engage with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're giving like a wealth and a gold mine to people right now that I think are struggling and are trying to reinvent themselves or reinvent their business or trying to stay alive. Tell me about, before we end today, I got a couple more questions, but tell me about the new book that's coming out.
So the new book, I won't say too much about it yet, but comes out in 2021. So TBD, make sure you follow me at Carlos Gill on 83 on Twitter and on Instagram. But you know what? What's interesting about the next book and kind of how things have played out, the beginning of 2020 was just absolute chaos for me. I'm sure like it's been for many other people out there, between, lost business and, lost speaking engagements galore. But the silver lining, which seems to be like the second half of this year, is like, okay, March, April, May happens. We're past that. We're in August now. I'm going to dust myself off and I'm going to get back to work and pick up the pieces. So normally in the world of publishing, a publisher wants their authors to market and sell the heck out of a book for at least 3 years. And I was able to convince my publisher that based on the current turn of events in the world, I can't wait 3 years. I need to give the world more of my knowledge, selfishly, for a couple different reasons. One, there was things that I wanted to put in the end of marketing that for one reason or another I didn't. And since then, since the book published, since I've gotten feedback from people, I really wish I would have written more about certain topics, gone a little bit deeper in detail. But also being that, COVID has happened, we have, the Black Lives Matter movement. We have so much that's happening in the world around us and online that marketers need a game plan. They can't go into 2021 operating like it's 2019 or 2018 because the world has changed. Marketing has changed. So I was able to convince my publisher to, let's kick this next project into high gear. So again, more to come, but I'm really excited. And again, it's finding the silver lining in an otherwise, down market or bad situation.
So much of what we do with I'm Changing the Narrative is self-care and intentions and playing out those intentions in your life on a daily basis. What are you focused on this Sunday as you go into your week that maybe you could share with the viewers that maybe they could apply in their lives too?
First of all, it's all about focusing on what you can control and not what you can't control. And that's been a mantra of mine for as long as I can remember, right? I really don't watch much TV. I don't watch much news, to be honest with you, because I think that there are a lot of influences that cloud your judgment, cloud your feelings. I don't like negativity. I don't do drama. So I really try to stay balanced and grounded in what I'm working on, what I can control. So I'm in the process of creating a couple courses. I've got my next book that's right around the corner that I'm gonna have to start sitting down and read and writing. And, part of that is being in the right headspace. It's really just kind of owning your own success and owning, even the downfalls too. How I get ready for a week, it's simple. I have a plan going into the week. I know that when Monday rolls around up until Friday, there's a project I'm working on, and they don't have to be huge projects. I'm a big fan of small wins. If you get small wins, and you add up all those small wins, they add up to big monumental wins. So it could be as basic as Monday through Friday, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work through a proposal for my next client, or I'm going to create the strategy for how in the month of September I use social media. I'm going to make this pivot and I'm going to do X. It can be that basic, but at least have a plan, especially in these times where a lot of us are working from home. A lot of us, aren't in our normal routine. Normally I'd be, doing an interview like this from my hotel room, not my kitchen. Normally I'd be on an airplane every other day flying somewhere. There's nothing normal about where we're at right now. Hell, in the last 2 months, I've started practicing self-care where I go out on daily walks. I'm getting in touch with nature. I'm disconnecting from social media. where I'm walking 3 miles a day. I'm eating right. And that's what goes back to focusing on what you can control. I can control what goes in my body. I can control my emotions. I can control my actions. I can't control what the world is going to do with COVID. I can't control, other things like masks and politics. I can't control anything like that. I can only focus on what I can control.
Carlos, I'll leave you with this. And we said this when we were chatting before we started the interview. So many people never realize their full potential, what they were put on this earth to do. And I say this, and I'm changing the narrative. They never discover their legacy, right? For a number of reasons. But one of those things is fear. And fear grips people, right? And so I just want to encourage anybody who's watching this right now, perhaps you're being reborn right now. Perhaps you're being called to being reborn right now. From a soul level, to what you do for a living, to your passion project, to whatever, to the move that you've always dreamed of doing, but you've never done it. Like the things that I always said, sometimes like wrapped up in our greatest fear is our greatest purpose. Like it's in there. If you can just wade to the fear, ride the wave, do the tango with the fear, and then be done with it. And so I think right now, man, somebody could take what you've given, the ideas and the expertise that you've given, get your book, and they could say, I need to make a pivot. It's the perfect time to make a pivot.
It's the perfect time. There's no better time than right now. And, I look at where we're at in history right now with COVID as almost like a gift, right? We've all been given the gift of time.
Yes.
How many times, no pun intended, have we wanted to execute on our passions, on our dreams, on writing that book, on creating that website, right? Redoing our media kit, so many things. And we always blame time as getting in the way. Oh, I wish I had more time. Or if only I had more time. Well, guess what? You have the time now. So go do it. No one's going to do it for you. I love that you said at the very beginning of this that, it was a line about being your biggest fan. I'm a big proponent of that mindset. No one's going to be a bigger fan of you than you, because if you're not going to be your biggest fan, then who is? And there's something to be said about that, because people feel that energy. They feel that confidence. I'd say in these times, don't get discouraged, because there's a reason why things are happening for us.